Shalom, shalom, and peace. Religious freedom is the first right guaranteed in the Bill of Rights, and the Founding Fathers saw it as fundamental to their vision of America. James Madison, our fourth president, widely regarded as the father of the Constitution, wrote, "A mutual independence between religion and state is found most friendly to religion, to social harmony, and to political prosperity." Particularly relevant today is John F. Kennedy's response to attacks on his fitness for office as a Roman Catholic, where he said, "For while this year it may be a Catholic against whom the finger of suspicion is pointed, in other years it has been a Jew or a Quaker or a Unitarian or a Baptist. Today I may be the victim, but tomorrow it may be you." Religious freedom, as enshrined in the U.S. Constitution, reads as follows: "Congress shall make no law establishing religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof." There are two parts to this statement, or to this religious clause of the First Amendment. The first prohibits the state establishment of any religious body. The second restricts the government from prohibiting the practice of any religion. Despite this simple declaration, religious freedom has been a contentious issue throughout our history. Even after the Bill of Rights proclaimed the freedom of religion as a founding principle, Native Americans were denied the right to practice their own religions well into the 20th century, while Christianity was forcibly imposed upon them throughout their history. Our state and local governments continue to establish churches, impose religious tests for public office, and violate religious freedom in other ways. For example, Catholics in the 19th century often saw their churches destroyed by mob violence, while governments restricted Catholic efforts to build parochial schools, and the scope of the First Amendment's guarantee of religious liberty remains contentious even today. In the famous 2014 Hobby Lobby decision, the Supreme Court declared that employers opposed to contraception on religious grounds do not have to offer health insurance that covers contraceptives. And the courts continue to battle over whether laws banning discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation violate the religious freedom of those who, on the basis of religious teachings, are opposed to homosexuality. It is in this context of ambiguity and challenges to religious freedom that American Muslims find themselves, raising questions of religious freedom in new ways. Most Americans are unaware that Muslims have a long history in the United States. Up to 30% of enslaved Africans brought to the Americas in the 1600s and 1700s were Muslim, though almost all were forced to give up their religion as other enslaved peoples did. Significant Muslim immigration to the US began in the mid-1800s, mostly from the Middle East. The immigration reform of 1965, abolishing geographic quotas, led to a substantial increase of Muslim immigration from both the Middle East and South Asia. It's also when my father, who was a psychiatrist, came to this country. Today, American Muslims number about 5 to 7 million people and are represented in virtually all occupations, especially physicians, as doctors, college professors, lawyers, and in Silicon Valley, where I live, as engineers and entrepreneurs in the tech industry. People may not know this, but Muslim women are the second most educated group of women in the United States, right after Jewish women, according to many surveys. American Muslims are a diverse community of people, more than half of whom were born in the United States, with significant percentages being second and third generation Americans. 40% of Muslims are immigrants, like myself, who hail from one of 50 Muslim majority countries in the world. I was born in Egypt. Their belief system is Abrahamic, meaning they worship the God of Abraham. They follow the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, who is believed to be following the essential teachings of the prophets that come before him, that include Noah, Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. Muslims believe in the hereafter, where we will be held accountable for our actions in this world. a belief that speaks to our responsibilities and to the values we share with all other Americans, such as care for the needy, care for the earth and its creatures, care for our communities, our nation, and our world. The aim of Muslims' religious practice is fundamentally the same as that of other faiths: virtuous character in all of our conduct. Islam strongly affirms the importance of strengthening families, advocating modesty in both dress and conduct, and shares many things with other religions, including prayer, charity, and fasting. Despite its shared heritage and common values with other religions, Islam is one of the most vilified religions in the United States today. It really didn't come to light in the public square until 9/11. And for that reason, negative perceptions about Islam persist to this day. Surveys of public attitudes show that Muslims are the most unfavorably regarded religious group in the country. Sharia, for example, which refers to divinely inspired values and principles that Muslims look to for guidance on worship and ethics, continues to be misrepresented by Islamophobes as a political doctrine aiming at world domination, which is nonsensical, but nonetheless believed by many Americans. Even the hijab, the headscarf, many Muslim women wear as a sign of modesty, as you see me wearing, similar to the modest dress of nuns and Orthodox Jewish women, provokes hostility and at times hate crimes. Some Americans, including some in public office, seem to think that constitutional protections of religious freedom should not apply to Muslims. And this raises another question about religious freedom. Is it simply a legal principle to be upheld by the government, or is it a fundamental American value? For if it is the latter, then it imposes obligations on all of us, and not just on government officials. As for the government, at least up until the last presidential elections, the federal courts have done a reasonably good job at protecting American Muslim rights, under the Obama administration particularly. For example, in situations where local governments have denied mosque construction or expansion, the federal government has stepped in and overturned those decisions. The most notorious was the controversy over the mosque in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, if you may remember the news, where federal agents physically came in to make sure that Muslims were able to enter their own mosque. As for the attitudes and actions of the American people, as I just noted, surveys of public attitudes still show considerable fear of Muslims, which not surprisingly, has led to an increasing number of hate crimes against them. In the first half of this year, 2017, after the elections, hate crimes against Muslims spiked 91% over the same period in 2016. The worst danger to religious liberty comes when public intolerance and biased government action converge. And that is precisely the situation that affects American Muslims today. There are numerous cases of local governments denying permits to mosques, which we hope the federal government will overturn. There are today over 100 bills banning Sharia that were introduced in 42 out of 50 states since 2010. 15 have been enacted into law. These laws rest on the distorted perception that Sharia is foreign or dangerous. Well, banning Sharia is like banning halakha for Jews or canon law for Catholics and Protestants, the laws that guide Jewish and Christian practice. Such bans are clearly unconstitutional, and yet these laws exist and continue to threaten religious freedoms of American Muslims. We now face a greater danger of this sort. The current administration has brought the federal government into this Islamophobic orbit. We have individuals in public office serving the highest government positions in the country who are openly promoting fear and distrust of Muslims, indiscriminately accusing Muslims of favoring terrorism, suggesting a registry of Muslims in the United States, and explicitly calling for a ban on all Muslim entry in the country. In addition, the current administration seems to be in the process of redefining terrorism as something perpetrated only by Muslims, ignoring contrary to the views of many law enforcement agencies, the fact that the greater danger is posed by white nationalist extremists, as we all witnessed in Charlottesville. And this has been mentioned in the speeches of the previous speakers. And people may not know this, but white nationalist groups are growing in recruitment, particularly after Charlottesville. And many of these people, as you well know, are heavily armed. So where do we go from here when public attitudes and major sectors of the federal government converge to threaten the religious freedom that is our birthright as Americans and as human beings? Crucial as the First Amendment is as a legal principle, we must recognize that freedom of religion or freedom of conscience goes much deeper than any legal provision. Without freedom of conscience, human beings are not free people. With this as our starting point, all of us must take the initiative to learn more about this freedom, its history, and the current threats. We must then resolve to fight back, individually and communally. We need to join and support the various organizations that protect this freedom, organizations like the Southern Poverty Law Center, the ACLU, and in the Muslim community, the Council on American Islamic Relations. We need to write letters to the editor and post and tweet on social media. We need to make clear to our representatives in government that we expect them to uphold religious freedom fully and vigorously. Learning, speaking, and acting together, we can preserve this fundamental birthright of our humanity. Because as President John F. Kennedy warned us, today I may be the victim, but tomorrow it may be you. Thank you.